Good morning, everyone. A good Chodesh Tov. We are learning Mishnayos Bikurim, Perek Beis, Chapter 2, Mishna Gimel, Mishna 3. I'd like to dedicate this morning's learning in memory of my mother, Mrs. Shalamis Rabinowitz, Shalamis Bas Rabbi Yaakov Eliezer. Yesh betruma u'maiser masha'en came bebikurim. Now the Mishnah lists the things that Truma and Meiser Sheni share, which do not apply by Bikurim. Truma v'hamaiser oisrin es hagoyrin. Truma and Meiser Sheni forbid the goyrin. They forbid the processed grain. As we learned previously, grain, before it is completely processed, one may not have a meal from it before Trumas and Meiser have been separated, but one may snack from them. Once they become fully processed, and we've learned previously, the Mishnayos tell us different things, what's considered the completing of processing by them. But once it hits that point, one is not allowed to eat from the grain until the Truma and Meiseris, all Meiseris, including Meiser Sheni, are separated. That is what Meiser Sheni and Truma have in common. Until they are separated, if once a grain is processed, until they are separated, one might not eat from that grain at all. V'yesh lahen shir, and they have a set amount, which means we know Meiser Sheni is a tenth. Truma, according to Torah law, there is no set amount how much you have to give to fulfill the mitzvah, but the sages instituted if you're generous 1/40th, if you're miserly 1/60th, and if you're in between 1/50th. But it's got to be one of those amounts. V'noy hagim b'chala peris, and Truma and Meiseris, Meiser Sheni, apply by all fruits. Now, Minatera, Trumas and Meiseris are separated from grain, grapes, and olives. That's according to Torah law. But the sages said any edible produce, also Trumas and Meiseris, have to be separated from it. So that's what it means that they apply by all produce. All types of produce, Trumas and Meiseris, have to be separated. Some of them are a Torah obligation, some of them are a rabbinic obligation. In front of the house and not in front of the house, meaning when we have a Beis HaMikdash or not. Even without a Beis HaMikdash, the produce of Eretz Yisrael, one has to separate Trumas and Meiseris from it. And even without a Beis HaMikdash, you have to separate Meiser Sheni. It's just that in that situation, you cannot eat the Meiser Sheni, rather you have to redeem it onto money and then throw the money into the ocean or into the sea. You got to completely get rid of it. Uba arisin of the chakoires uva sikrikoin uva gazlan, and Trumas and Meiseris will apply by a sharecropper, by a tenant farmer, which we've had a couple of times already before. The sharecropper gets a percentage of the produce. It's not his land; he's working on someone else's land. But the deal is that he gets a share of the produce. If he is a tenant farmer, there's a set amount of produce that he has to pay as his rent, no matter how much it produces. The sikrikain are people who take your land or else they'll kill you. Uva gazlan means a thief who doesn't necessarily so brazenly take it away from you like that. Those people, although they have stolen the land upon which they are growing the grain, nonetheless, the grain that grows from the land of Israel, no matter where it comes from, whether it's from stolen property or not, there's an obligation to separate Trumas and Meiseris from it. Harelu b'Truma v'Meiser. All these things apply by Truma and Meiser Sheni. Masha'en came by Bikurim. It does not apply by Bikurim. So let's go through the list. Although Truma and Meiser Sheni, once the grain is processed, if you don't separate them, you cannot eat the grain. That is not true by Bikurim. Even if you haven't separated Bikurim, you can still eat from the grain. Bikurim doesn't forbid you from eating before it's separated. Is there a set amount to Bikurim? No, not even Midrabanan does not a set amount. Give anything you want, as little as you want. And the next thing is that Trumas and Meiser Sheni apply by all produce, not Bikurim. Bikurim is only by the Shivas Haminim, the 7 species that the land of Israel is praised for. B'fnei Abayis, you need a Beis HaMikdash to bring Bikurim, because Bikurim are brought. The Torah says you bring the Bikurim and put them by the altar. There's no Mizbeach, there's no altar, there's no Bikurim. And as we've said before, anybody who doesn't own the land that the produce grows from cannot bring Bikurim. Bikurim only comes from the land that Hashem gave you, and if it's not your land, then you can't. Then there's no mitzvah bikurim from it. So that's by bikurim. So bikurim, the shumas and maasros, even if it's not your land, grows from the land of Israel, you got to give shumas and maasros. But by bikurim, it's got to be your land in order to have an obligation to bring bikurim, and therefore all these cases, the sharecropper, the tenant farmer, or the thief, it's not their land, and therefore they have no mitzvah to bring bikurim. We continue with the laws of Rechilas, Klal Tes, chapter 9, from the Chavetz Chaim, Sif Hey, paragraph 5. V'ata navai leva'er bes Hashem yisbarach eidei kagod b'yanim elu. V'idei yisbar lacha gam ken ha'perach hamishi yanal. Now I'm going to lay out, says the Chavetz Chaim, a very important principle. Everyone should know, the chol etzem ha'heter shekasavle b'sif aleph. That which we started this chapter with. The Chavetz Chaim said that if you know that Reuven is going to partnership with Shimon, and you size up that Reuven is going to be damaged from this partnership, we said you can tell him that. Okay. We're talking about before they've come into a final agreement to be partners. So they haven't done that yet. They haven't gone through they haven't gone yet through the process that makes them bound to each other in the partnership. But they decided, they agreed, they're going to go through with it. That's what we're talking about. He says the Chavetz Chaim is what I'm talking about when I say before that you can tell him to avoid it. But if, let's say, the matter has already been finalized, and finalized means, the Shulchan Aruch tells us, the manner is by which a partnership is finalized, what you do to finalize it. And when you finalize it, you're obligated to keep your part of the partnership. So if we're talking about that the partnership isn't finalized, totally bazeh. Now to be able to tell him about the dangers of his partner depends on this. If now when you reveal to Reuven about Shimon, if you know, Reuven, the other partner, will not damage him in any way. Just that now he will be specially on guard so as not to be hurt by this person. And all the other conditions that we mentioned before are met. The conditions of not to exaggerate, for sure, you've contemplated well the situation. Your intention is for a constructive purpose, and it's going to be a constructive purpose. Then it's permissible and appropriate to let him know the dangers of his partnership with the other person. But if he knows the nature of the person that he is speaking to, that if he reveals to him this matter, he will right away accept it as the absolute truth. Either because that's the kind of person that he is, or perhaps someone says some kind of evidence here, or because you're someone that he trusts very much. And now, based on just what you told him, he will now take things into his own hands and act upon that. Meaning what he'll do now, he's going to back out or cause some other kind of damage. All based on what you told him. Even though he will not do anything worse than what would have that which the law would have allowed him to do if what you told him would have been told by two witnesses in a beis din, in a rabbinical court. So the information you're giving him is information that actually, through a beis din with two witnesses, he could act upon it. He could break up the partnership. But now there's only you. You're only one witness. Nonetheless, now it's forbidden. Because now with the information that you shared with him, you're causing damage to that person that you're talking about, which would not come through your words, Even if you would have testified in a Beis Din. Because if you would have in a Beis Din said this over. Beis Din could never act upon what you said because you just want a witness. So now by you telling that person now acting as if Beis Din to witness said Paskin rendered a decision to say he can go and break up the partnership, that doesn't work because at the end of the day you're only one witness, so he can't act upon that. Now, if so, let's say the two people who want to tell Reuben about Shimon, there's two of them. There's two people. They themselves have seen the matter. They themselves recognize this is not a good partnership. And they both feel strongly and would have the ability, and they both know why Reuben is going to be hurt by Shimon. Then it would seem that wouldn't be considered rechilas. Because their intention is only to prevent this person from being hurt. And what happens at the end wouldn't be happening any worse than what a Beis Din would allow to happen, because now we have two people, we have two witnesses. But if these two people size up the situation and they see and they think that this person is going to do more to the partner than what Beis Din would have allowed him to do based on their testimony, they have no right, they're no better than one person. And they're not going to be able, they'll be forbidden for them to tell it over. Now, Beis still got to make sure that all the other conditions, not to exaggerate, to intend for a constructive purpose, there will be a strict purpose, etc. All these things have to be relevant. So the point of the Chavetz Chaim in this paragraph is to say that if you want to, the issue here is when you go ahead and you tell Reuven about Shimon, that Shimon is not a good guy and Shimon is going to hurt you in the partnership, that's rechilas. Because now Reuven's going to think badly of Shimon or act badly against Shimon. Now, if you know that when you tell Reuven this, he will deal with it appropriately. So in the Chavetz Chaim's case, that the partnership is here. He has no right to make up the partnership just on what you're based on what you're saying, but he'll just protect himself. Then tell him, and it's a mitzvah to tell him. But if you know the person is going to act more than that, so even though were there to be two witnesses testifying in Beis Din with the same information that you have, he could act the way he wants to act, but he doesn't have that right now. He only has you, so he can't do that. So therefore, says the Chavetz Chaim, now let's say there are two people who are now telling him about this. Two people know how much Shimon is going to hurt him. So now, were they to have been in the Beis Din, the Beis Din would have allowed him to go and do what he wants to do now because two people are just telling him not in Beis Din. Then, says the Chavetz Chaim, as long as their intention is for a constructive purpose, and they know that when they tell Reuven this, Reuven won't do more than what a Beis Din would allow him to do, then there's no problem of rechilas. Then there is no prohibition of rechilas. This is not called rechilas. The prohibition of speaking rechilas, which means, telling someone else about what someone else wants to do to them and cause that person to dislike them, that's not going to be relevant here because what you're saying is truthful. It's for a constructive purpose. And it's not words that wouldn't have given the person allowance to break up the partnership if they would have been in a Beis Din. So therefore, it's not rechilas. Not rechilas. However, if you think about it, let's read the next paragraph. What we're saying now that by two people, it wouldn't be rechilas, talking about a person who's going to act on his own. And the only thing that they have now accomplished is that they're not speaking, they're not transgressing the prohibition of rechilas. But at the end of the day, they fall under a prohibition called aiding a person doing a sin. And that they're going to be guilty of. Because based on what they're telling this person, he's doing something wrong. The end of the day, you weren't in a bezdin. Even the two people aren't in a bezdin. If they're not in a bezdin, he can't just go acting on what you said. So it comes out at the end that maybe that technically it may not be Lashon Harah, it may not be Rechilas, but you're still aiding a person doing something wrong. Because if he's going to act on your words, it's wrong for him to act in this way because it's not happening in Beis Din. Now, so therefore, it really comes out that even by two people, may not be Rechilas, but you're aiding the person doing something wrong, so you're not allowed to tell him. The ein matzui klal sheyedu ha'mesaprin me'atzmam et chiyah v'kolcha ke'adin m'shashayach b'inyan zeh. Kedei sheyisharu al yedei zeh, shema sheyasa imoy ploini al yedei dibur and yasa imoy kedin Torah. Another point the Chavetz Chaim makes is the following. At the end of the day, you can tell him, the two witnesses, the two people can tell him something, and we say it's not Rechilas because if you would have been in a Beis Din, he could do what he wants to do. So basically, you're not saying anything. What you're telling him about Shimon and what he's going to do based on what you said is technically nothing. Would technically work in a Beis Din. Okay. Now, for that to make sense, it has to make sense that when you're telling him that, you know that. Like if you don't know that what you're telling him, even two of you would even accept it in a Beis Din, then you wouldn't have a right to go ahead and say it, because if he's acting based on your words, do you really know that in Beis Din these words would have allowed him to have done it? You don't know that. And if you don't know that, you have no right to go ahead and tell him if he's going to act on it. So therefore, practically speaking, it doesn't work. This whole idea by two people is not really going to work. Okay, and therefore, it says the Chavetz Chaim, at the end of the day, theoretically it could happen. Practically, it's not going to happen. And therefore, whether it's one person or two people, and this person is going to just act on what you say without going through Beis Din to break up the partnership, let's say, you're not allowed to tell it to him. And by doing so, you save yourself from the sin of Rechilas. And as he concludes, the one who guards his mouth and tongue, guards his soul from suffering. Have a wonderful day. And again, Chodesh Tov.